Turn to John 7:40. And then also, some of you might want to turn to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 10. Okay, while they're being handed out, let me get your minds to going by asking you to think about something. So, we've done this, we did this flyover of the 7 ecumenical councils, and even though it took longer than I anticipated, several weeks instead of one Sunday, it was still something of a whirlwind tour, and you may have felt a bit bewildered by but it was, even with the sketchy sense that you got from all the conflicts and the issues that were being wrestled over, and with the Christological controversies, I wonder if you could, if you got enough of a sense that you could contemplate this question. We have a number of bishops. Some of them were Holy Fathers, some were not, because they taught the wrong thing. And they had different takes or different solutions to the Christological riddle. So here's the question. Can you discern, or would you feel it's fair to say that if I were to narrow down the options, that could you say that can you see a distinction, a difference between those Holy Fathers whose solution to the Christological riddle, even if their terminology wasn't refined and precise, was drawn from the altar of the Church? And could you discern maybe other fathers whose solution to the Christological riddle was drawn from, let's say, how should we say it, the Stoa, not the Stoa, but the Portico of Athens, the philosophers. Let's say the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Could you discern that?
Say yes or prove it.
No, you don't have to prove it.
Okay.
But I want you to see that. I want you to see that. Maybe you didn't see it before until I brought it to your attention. That when you look at the various solutions to the Christological riddle, you might, because why is it, for example, that Apollinarius, remember he's the one that taught that the divine Logos assumed a flesh and a soul, but not a human mind. St. Gregory of Nazianzus was one of the chief opponents of Apollinarius, and who championed the case against him. But he insisted that there is a human mind. If there's no human mind, there's no human nature. And if there's no human mind, then the mind is not saved. But the mind is the most essential part of human nature. But did he solve the problem that Apollinarius raised? He didn't really solve it. He simply asserted, you might say that he solved it. He simply asserted that the mind is actually truly free only when it is in union with God. So who was the philosopher? Who was the bishop? They're both bishops. You see the point? So, yes?
Is it the idea of Christ as an idea versus Christ as a person?
Well, that might be part of it, yeah. But what I'm after is how those who are trying to solve the Christological problem, the Christological riddle, by couching it in terms of Greek philosophy, and it's like they were imprisoned by philosophy, the categories of philosophy. They could not think outside of that, and so therefore, Apollinarius, for example, could not hold that the Lord had a human mind. Theodore of Wesche, on the other hand, could not hold that there was a true union, that Jesus was his own subject, really for the same reason, that the human mind cannot unite with God and still be free. So Theodore's solution was in order to maintain the full integrity of the human nature, let's treat it as its own subject. So there's no real union, but there's a full human nature. But he too, you can see, his terms might be Aristotelian, Aristotle. Jason?
Is it on the subject of Apollinaris, and I apologize since I haven't been here, so I don't know the full context, but Apollinaris' subject was that Christ did not have a human mind, because the human mind is, by, at least from the philosophical nature, is designed to ponder, to understand, and therefore if one is omniscient, one cannot do the basics in theory of pondering the human mind. Similarly, I think in the other bishop's assertion that humanity cannot be fully free if it was so united in Christ as a person, because God, and I think even now there's, and myself, struggle with this stumbling block that humanity is inherently flawed, limited, and just needs to stumble towards God.
Okay, that's the point right there. It's not the omniscience. That'll become an issue later on. How much did Jesus as a man know? But, that wasn't a breaking point, a deal breaker. That's the issue. That the mind is inherently, or is innately in conflict with God. So that if there was a human mind in Christ, with the divine Logos, there would be this internal conflict. So to solve that conflict, Apollinaris got rid of the mind. Theodore Mopsuestia basically severed the intimacy of the union and basically made Jesus to be this man who, by just sheer force of will, did what he was asked to do and got rewarded in the end. So it's very similar, Cheryl, to Pelagianism. And Nestorius, actually I think it was Nestorius, welcomed Pelagius into his home after he had been condemned in the West. The idea that you can win your salvation on your own efforts. So anyway, I just want you to be thinking about them, to see that there are, if you will, that there are two different starting points to the solution of the Christological riddle. I'm saying that the one is from the altar of the church. The other is just kind of circling around the altar, but its real allegiance would be to the Areopagus, the hill of Areopagus in Athens, the philosopher's hill. So with this, let's go to John chapter 7, verse 40. Because, it is a bit, isn't it not? For some people, it's distressing to go through the Christological controversies from the 300s to the 700s and see all of this turmoil, this conflict, and, bishops getting into fisticuffs over it. Why can't they just be nice to each other? Saint Nicholas in the 4th century, at the First Ecumenical Council, slugged Arius in the face. And of course they imprisoned him. That's not nice to do. But then some angel comes to the bishops and says, he did the right thing, release him. And that was just the beginning of all kinds of similar kinds of, it got physical. The altercations got physical. And it can be distressing. And, very nice ties. Saint Theodore, he's not a saint, Theodore Mopsuestia, Diodore of Tarsus, they were highly venerated in their regions, that they were condemned as heretics. It just doesn't seem, so I thought it'd be, a couple of years ago perhaps I was reading from this, John chapter 7, and it hit me, it's like a hammer, it hit me on the head. So let's read John chapter 7 verse 40 and following. It says, among the crowd then, those who were hearing these words were saying, truly, this is the prophet. Now we're referring to the prophet that Moses told Israel just before he died, as they were preparing to cross over into Canaan. He told them, the Lord will send you another prophet like me. And of course, the prophet that came after Moses was a great prophet. His name was Jesus, or Yehoshua, Joshua. But as great as Joshua was, I mean, he led them into the land of Canaan. They conquered Canaan for the most part, not completely. As great as Joshua was, he still did not satisfy or fulfill the expectations that Moses had engendered in the people for this prophet that would be like Moses, who would come after him. So that even in Jesus' day, they're still looking for this prophet that would come after Moses, that would be like Moses. So they're saying, surely, this is the prophet. Others say, this is the Christ. And others were saying, no, for the Christ is not coming, he does not come from Galilee. No, he can't, because is the Christ coming from Galilee? Is the Christ come from Galilee? Or no, because the Christ doesn't come from Galilee, right? Do not the scriptures say that he's from the seed of David and from Bethlehem, from the village where the Christ will come from the village where David was? So then it's in verse 43. And there came to be a schism among the people, or in the crowd, because of him. And some even wanted to seize him, but no one dared to lay hand on him. So it's just and Jesus says in another place, he says, "I came not to cast peace, but a sword." Right? So there's something about Jesus that is inherently controversial, shall we say, or schismatic. So, and you look at the churches. So now let's go to 1 Peter. It's really hard to restrain oneself and not do the theology here, because verses 10 through 12, in the Greek, they end, these two verses, 10, 11, 12, these three verses end at the tomb. You may not see that in your English translations, but it's in the Greek, because the three verses end with this, into which, in other words, this mystery of the Christ who was coming, into which angels longed to stoop down and peer into. It ends with that verb, paraskupse, to stoop down and to peer into. Guess what? It's the same verb in John 20, verse 5, where St. John and St. Peter, they come to the empty tomb and they parakupse, they stoop down to look in. Which I take to mean that the mystery of Christ, which the prophets, in verse 10, concerning this salvation, the prophets, they sought it out. It's a very intense verb, two verbs. They sought it out, they looked for it. They wanted to know, what is this grace that we're prophesying about? They wanted to know who and on what time, what would be the season, when would the things that the Spirit of Christ was bearing witness to them, when it would be revealed, and the sufferings of Christ and the glory afterwards. When is all this going to happen? But it was revealed to them that it was not to them but to you, to us, that these things were serving us. These very things, in verse 12, these very things that were proclaimed to you through those who evangelized you, those who preached the gospel to you in the Holy Spirit that was sent from heaven. This is the salvation into which, in other words, this salvation, this grace that is in you, verse 10, concerning the grace that is in you, this is what the angels and the prophets longed to understand. And that's when we get this last phrase in verse 12, into which the angels even, and the word is, it's the same word that can be used. It means intense desire. It means it can be used for carnal desire, lust. It's epithumia. Those of you who know some Greek, it's epithumia. It's just, but it's also used in the psalm for God satisfying every desire. Epithumos, whatever the noun is. So in other words, it's an intense longing that the angels had to stoop down. They were stooped down, stooping down. And so the beauty of it is that it's showing, I believe, that the mystery of God that was hidden from the ages, this mystery of God that is Christ in you, is found in the tomb. I think that's profoundly important. The tomb, we've looked at the Liber Graduum, this 4th century Syriac Christian text, which I think articulates a biblical principle of incarnation. That is to say, that the invisible is reflected in the visible opens onto the invisible. So, the tomb of Christ is an icon. It's a mirror that reflects the tomb of your own heart. Your heart is a tomb. And I'm not making that up. Those of you who have been around at St Herman's for a while, I've quoted St Macarius a number of times. This is from St Macarius. When you hear of physical tombs, don't just think of physical tombs. Your own heart is a tomb. When the devil makes thoroughfares in there and they walk into your heart and disrupt all of your thoughts, do you not think that you're a dead man toward God? You're a hell, you're a tomb, you're a sepulcher. So that is, it's the heart that is the tomb. So the mystery of Christ in the tomb is the mystery of Christ in you. It's a beautiful image. And the tomb of Christ, he's risen from the dead, so the tomb is emptied. He's not there anymore. That means that your tomb, that the tomb of your heart, has been emptied. There's no death in there anymore. And the bridegroom who was in your heart and transformed your heart into a bridal chamber, he's gone. He's gone before you, if you would, into Galilee. Okay, I'm getting off onto the theology. I didn't mean to do that. But you see why it's hard to restrain oneself from getting into the theology. It's very profound and very, very beautiful. But the point that I'm trying to draw here, is that the mystery of Christ is found not in the halls of the philosophers, because those halls, if you will, are outside the tomb. They're in the mind, outside the tomb. In order to find the mystery of Christ, and I think this is why why he causes so much schism among those who profess him even. In order to find the Christ, one must find one's way into the tomb of one's heart. But the tomb also means that you must freely lay aside all of our own thoughts, our own understandings, all of the philosophical categories that we've learned to think in, that we've been trained and shaped in, from pre-K to graduate school and beyond. All of that has to be put to death. We have to become dead men towards God, so that he can refashion us, raise us up. So that the tomb of Christ, of course, is the altar of the church. So this gets us back to those fathers who sought the solution for the Christological riddle from the altar of the church. In other words, they were seeking the solution to the Christological riddle from inside the tomb of their heart. From inside the tomb of their heart. And not from the halls of the philosophers. So, with that as a kind of an intro, we've already taken up half our class time, there are there's two things that I wanted to kept before me. And the one is first. See, I had them in my head before I came to church this morning. I'm going to kind of fish them out again. But the one is, okay, there's the one that's the, okay, I think the one is the source of one's thought and understanding. And the other is, the first one is I will say, it's the question about, it's the doctrine of creation, you say, and the, how would you say it? Well, can I say ontology? Ontology is a word that means being, the way that being is. I mean, how is it structured? I say that the table is whatever. Caleb is whatever. Well, you notice that they're two completely different things, and yet what's the same about them is that they both are. What is that isness that everything is? What does it look like? And what's its structure? What is its stuff? What is its essence? What is it that everything is when reduced down to its isness? That's ontology. It's a map of being, if you will. So let's just say, we'll say the nature of reality. Or how about Matthew, we say that true physics. What do you think? True physics. We'll go with it for now. So let's, if you would, find it. Hang on. Let's go to Acts chapter 17. And let's look starting at verse 17 to 33. This is what it says in the Revised Standard Version. This is the translation. So he argued at St. Paul. He argued in the marketplace every day with those who chanced to be there. Some also of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers met him, and some said, "What would this babbler say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he preached Jesus and the resurrection." And they took hold of him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is which you present? For you bring some strange things to our ears." You might want to highlight new teaching. What is this new teaching you present? And also highlight strange things. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean, what these strange things mean, the strange things of this new teaching, what it means. So Paul said, "Men of Athens, as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your poets have said. For we are indeed his offspring. And he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all men by raising him from the dead." Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So St. Paul went out from among them. So, can you locate, and you may not be able to, but what would you think, just from reading the text? What is it that caught the philosophers? What was it about St. Paul's teaching that caught the philosophers, that they thought was strange, and a new teaching? Can you locate it? Yes, Matthew?
Well, it says when they heard of the resurrection of the dead,
Yeah.
so they started to mock him.
Yeah. Now,
I would
The
say
reason
that
that-
the strange teaching is the incarnation, I mean, because they knew about gods.
Okay,
And they even knew about one being the Most High.
okay,
But the fact that this Most High would become incarnate,
instead of like an avatar.
yeah, was strange to them.
It certainly was. It certainly was. That a man, well, and not even the idea that a man could be God, that's not particularly strange to the Greeks. You are God.
Right. But that God became man, that's the reverse. I mean, it's totally upside down
Right.
from their normal thinking.
There's also the resurrection of the dead that you've mentioned. However, the mystery cults and all the philosophers were members, or if not most of them, if not all of them, were members of they were devotees of the mystery cults that was centered on what? Death and resurrection.
With the Isis and Osiris.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Who was it? Ishtar and Dumuzi. Ishtar, from which we get the name Easter. She's dying and rising. Who was it? Persephone and Demeter. Was it Demeter? So all of these, there's Dionysius and his mother Aphrodite. So there's, so why would they have been struck by the resurrection? And then even to Cynthia's point, why would they be struck by the notion of a man becoming God? Or God becoming man? In other words, God becoming man. Not just taking the form of a man. Would they have been shocked by Apollinaris, you think? I don't think so. Would they have been shocked by Theodore of Mopsuestia? I don't think so. Honestly, I don't think so. Because for Theodore of Mopsuestia, Jesus is a man who's in a very special relationship with God, and it constitutes a kind of a tight relationship, but it's not a union. Jesus, the subject, is not God except by association. And that's very close to many philosophical notions of, holy men.
Isn't that what Muslims believe about Christ too?
Could be. I'm not a student of Muslims.
He's a special, even a prophet, but he's definitely not
Well,
Son of God.
what I've heard, and I haven't studied this at all, is that Arianism is what Islam, it became Islam. Or I should say that, is that what you've heard? Yeah.
That's what I understand.
Yeah. So Arianism didn't die, it became Muslim.
And Jehovah's Witnesses.
Matthew.
Well, I sort of answering this, I think Muhammad actually studied with, so the interesting thing about Muhammad is that his father was named Ata'Allah, meaning servant of God. So he did not come up with a monotheism all on his own. His father was actually a follower of the God of Abraham.
So what, he was a Jew or what?
Possibly.
Okay.
Very possibly. But he studied underneath an Arian monk. I forget the name of the
Oh,
Arian monk now. But
okay.
that was one of the sources of his
Okay.
revelation.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't know anything about that story. But anyway, to locate what is strange, and here I think is the cue. You notice, you go back to the text, and so the philosophers, they invite Paul to come back and to talk more about them, about these strange things that constitute this new teaching of his. Where does he start? With what concept with what doctrine does he begin? What does he say?
With creation.
Say that again?
With creation.
Yes. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth. In him we live and that was the new thing. That was the strange thing. The doctrine of creation. And you can see that at the heart, at the nub, at the root of the Christological riddle. The doctrine of creation. And along with that, the notion of the nature of reality as basically one. Remember I said that mythology, her waters are broken, and she gives birth to philosophy. And philosophy comes out in the form of the question, what's, the riddle of the one and the many. So those are the two philosophical points that are at the nub of the Christological riddle. Let me read from Saint, maybe he is a saint, Father George Kwarowski. The Greek mind was firmly addicted to the conception of an eternal cosmos, permanent and immutable, in its essential structure and composition. Its existence was necessary. Its existence was an ultimate or first datum. In other words, it was a philosophical axiom, a hypothesis. It was the starting point you didn't even think about. You just started from that in any inquiry that you might have. Beyond which neither thought nor imagination could penetrate. The cosmos as a whole was unchangeable, and its permanent structure was repeatedly and unfailingly exhibited in its rotation and self-iteration. So you see, in this scheme, even the doctrine of the resurrection would be strange, because it would imply that cycle of death and resurrection is broken. This is where it gets to be fun. You know, the Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its tail is an image of the great round, a circle of life, which always ends in death. So, what does it say in Genesis? The serpent will bite the heel of Eve's child as he crushes the head of the serpent. Well, what do you see on the... You don't see it on my cross. But in many crosses, you have what will be here at the bottom of Christ's feet. Skull and crossbones, yes. The devil. So it's like, Christ crushes the head of the serpent. He breaks this round. And now, here's the midnight hour. And now, those who are united with Christ in that hour in the resurrection, they escape the round of death. They are liberated from death. So this is what would be new. I mean, this would even change the nature of the resurrection for the ancients. The notion of an incarnation, well, that implies that God became man who died. Really died. And it didn't repeat itself. That too would be new. So this is what's at the heart of so much of the Christological controversies, is the doctrine of creation. Let's see if I have finished this. There was in the cosmos an intense dynamism, but it was a dynamism of inescapable circulation. We're all caught in this dynamism, this movement. We're caught in it. You can't get out of it. One simply could not ask intelligently about the origin or the beginning of the cosmic fabric and the order of existence. So in the ancient world, there were many schools of philosophy, but they were all basically so many forms of monism. Monism means that everything is there's just one. There's just one thing. The many are the one. We've talked about Empedocles, that the essence of reality is love. But what he means by love is that the many dissolve into the one and disappear. He's just repeating what's also in the Far East, the Upanishads. What is Brahman? That Brahman art thou. And your destiny is to dissolve into Brahman. And the world exists as just so many, what are they called? What are they called? Kalpas? Is that the word? These ages, about 25,000 years. a number, by the way, which is calculated from the stars, from astronomy, calculating the movement of the stars and the recession of the sun through the different signs of the zodiac. So that when the 25,000 years ends, everything will be dissolved back into Brahman, or back into the One, and then he'll breathe it out again. It'll start all over. And you have another series, you have another Kalpa, 25,000 years or whatever it is. So this is reality. So we've already answered the question that I have here in my notes. What sense does the preaching of a man risen from the dead make if the world is eternal? How would that shape your understanding of death and life if the world was eternal? Or what it means to be saved? What would it mean to be saved if the world is eternal? And your destiny is to dissolve back into the One, and then come back, or before you dissolve into the One, you're kind of doing this round, what do you call it? What's that? The word escapes me. You want to talk about reincarnation? Yes, this reincarnation. So it's not incarnation; it's reincarnation. Matthew?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that the answer that Buddha came up with to the Upanishads was precisely a breaking of ground in the concept of nirvana.
Yes.
But what is saved is not the person.
Hang on. You're right. The way you escape this realm is to enter into no thing. The nirvana of no thing. However, this is what strikes me about that. How do you get to that? And I guess here's the other thing, that this is the second thing that we're already at the end. This is the second thing that I wanted to bring to your attention. I don't want you to get the idea that the Christological controversy was a contest between rationalists and spiritualists or theologians. It was a spiritual issue through and through, because the philosophers, as I said, they were, if not all of them, most of them were all devotees of the mystery religions. And the earliest philosophers would have been priests in one of the occultic cults of the Greek Mother. And their philosophical understanding, their understanding of the world, it wasn't arrived at by logical, inductive, discursive reasoning. Socrates' effort to introduce discursive reasoning was precisely an effort to break through the fluff of Maya, you might say, and try to get to the hardcore reality of things. But the philosophers, their understanding of reality was from the altar. It was from the altar of the mystery religions. And you read the earliest philosophers. None of them is claiming their vision for themselves as their own. They're all saying that it's coming. That this is what the gods have revealed to me. This is what the goddess has revealed to me. Is it Parmenides? He begins his poem with something about how the goddess came to me, and this is what she told me about reality. But my point to close this session, to get upstairs, getting back to Matthew's point, how do you get to this point where you can escape? Well, straighten the serpent out, right? Straighten him out. So now you have your backbone, right? Here's the loins, here's the head. How many stations are there between these 2 points? Chakras, Matthew, how many are there? There's 7. There's 7. So you bring your attention, this is the whole enterprise of philosophy, at least in its earliest phases, trying to discern the God that I am. And then finding that God in the energy, the prana, the energy that is flowing, the libido, we call it in Freudian terms, the libido, the sexual energy, the erotic energy that's flowing through me. Locating it, finding it, latching onto it. tracing it from its origin down here, or appears to be the origin down here, and then going up here, tracing it through the 7 chakras, and into the 7th chakra, the head, and out into the 8th chakra, which is salvation. Now you've been liberated. How is that different from, let's say, the Christian way of prayer?
We go up and down.
You go down here to the heart, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. And I think it fascinating. The behavior of some of these early philosophers was bizarre, and even had all the appearance of demonic possession. It was very similar. I mean, you read the stories on Mount Athos of monks who have been deceived by the devil. They go into this way of prayer, and then they forget humility. They stop confessing their sins. They get full of themselves, and the devil comes and deceives them. And many of them, they do these stupid things because they're seeing a vision that's not real. Give into the vision. It turns out, for example, that they are stepping into a boat that's going to take them to heaven, but in fact there's no boat there, and there's a cliff, and there's rocks down below, and so they fall to their death in the belief that they're getting into a boat going to heaven. There's one philosopher who did a very similar thing, who, to show that he was immortal, got to the lip of a volcano and jumped into the volcano. To me, that's behavior that's very similar to what we read about on Mount Athos. So this whole thing, I mean, the grace of God being what it is, maybe there were those who, I don't know. I just note that this is quite different, and I wonder if this is a way of deception. You read, for example, in I think it's the Upanishads, a map of this way, and it says something like, if you begin to hear bells and you see lights and know that you're drawing near. You read in, let's say, the Philokalia, can't remember where it was, it says almost the same thing, except it says this: when you start seeing lights, and you start hearing sounds, bells, whistles, flee, because you're drawing near the precipice. St. Silouan, in his ascetical life, his ascetical prayer, got very deep into himself, into his soul. It's like he came to this beautiful light, mesmerizingly beautiful, and he wanted so much to give himself to it, but something held him back. And then I don't remember if it was in confession or if somehow he himself came to realize that the light that he had seen there at the edge of creation was the light of the image of God that was himself. It was himself. It was not God. And so it makes me wonder, so in other words, the light is the uncreated light that is beyond all of that. And so it just makes me wonder if, following this way, in the darkness, not knowing where you're going, it's very easy to be deceived, and you come into this light. It's beautiful, but it's the beauty of creation. It's the beauty of the image of God in which you were created. But it is not God. And you wonder if that's what it was, if that's part of what Adam and Eve's fall was all about. They were captured by the beauty of the tree of learning good and evil. They were captured by the beauty of creation. And they gave themselves to that beauty. And they became, as it says, as though they were gods. And they would not repent. And so they were expelled. So, okay, that's all we have time for. So this is something to think about. And we'll, as we go through now the kind of the inner theological issues of Christology.